What's up, everybody? Alex here. Just wanted to let you guys know that this episode is actually a two-parter. We ended up having a really good conversation with our guest and wanted to split it up into two parts. So enjoy part one. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tap Often podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and with me, as always, is my sleeved co-host this week, BJ. BJ, how are you?
I'm doing great. Sleeves. The hoodie will come off at some point. A little chilly down here in the recording studio.
I look forward to that. And BJ, this week we have a special guest, so why don't you introduce them for us?
We do, man. So I'm really excited about this one. I say that like every episode, but this is on a much more personal level. We're here with Dr. Lyneil Mitchell, who is an absolute expert in really all things human. So he was we're childhood friends. We go back over 40 years, I would say. Grew up in the same neighborhood, same playground, playing the same sports against each other. He was a little bit younger than me. So I probably got my licks in, but I don't really remember that ever happening. Yeah, he's an incredible.
It's funny how it works that way. You don't remember, but I do, right? Like that's how it goes.
Totally don't remember. I just remember suffering for the most part. But Lyneil's an incredibly distinguished physical therapist, sports performance coach, an incredible insight into mindset. When I say highest level, I'm talking the highest level. He's worked with everyone from Ronda Rousey to the great Helen Maroules, who not enough people know about. But she's really in the pantheon of like women's athletics, especially in grappling sports, combat sports. She's the pinnacle in my mind. Everything to Chad Ochocinco. So maybe you have some insights on eating McDonald's for your only meal.
Sleeping in the stadium.
Yeah. I'm sure you got some stories. Did some work with Troy Polamalu too, I believe. We were just talking about Sheamus, Samoa Joe, Batista. So really, you've seen Hylie's Fountain, a wide variety of sports, and not just at the highest level, but I also know you've done incredible work for especially around like teenage girls coming off of ACL injuries, even to little kids, little 8-year-old kids that you've worked with. So you've seen the gamut, and you've developed a pretty incredible system that takes in a lot of different methodologies and modalities and really have blended them together in your work. And it's just been incredible to watch happen. You're also a 2-time All-American wrestler at Gannon. So with that being said,
they do this, right?
Yep. I have a Penn State shirt underneath.
Nice.
That's the closest I can get. So without further ado, we got Dr. Lyneil Mitchell.
Hey, thanks, man. Yeah, this is really cool to be here. It's funny because when you started to say who I am, I joke a lot and I say I have a better sense of human. And so it's like one of my little soundbite joke type of things, but it's kind of true. Like I've just always been fascinated with the human condition and, how we have to navigate this world. And as you get into physical therapy, a lot of times I think people think it's just some stretches and some muscle activation type of stuff, but it's really, coaching a human being to go from a, situation of a being in a state of lesser physical function to a higher level of physical function, which affects their entire, state of the world that they live in, everything from the view that they see things to, literally how they're, sleeping and how they're functioning in their everyday life. If you ignore those things, then you end up having blind spots where you miss things and it typically ends up slowing down the rehab process. So, especially when you're working with these high level people, all of those things matter. Even like we were just talking about circadian rhythms and sleep, right? If you're recovering from an injury, you can't ignore that. And I know, BJ, you've had your share of injuries and really amazing, recovery processes. And so, you have to, the more that you take those things into consideration, the smoother the process is.
Yeah, sure. Yes, not enough invested in recovery.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I basically went out of the gates after, like you were talking about how I, had this kind of cool career, really. But it was just, we didn't have a lot of answers back then. I know you and I have talked over the years, off and on about different things in training and rehab. And so I always think about my first basic biology class that I had in college. I went in, thinking I'm going to get all the answers, right? We're going to sit down and everything is known, and I'm finally here. I'm in college, and they're going to give me everything that I've been asking, my whole life. And we get to the nervous system section, and I'll never forget this. It was Father Gregoric. I went to a Catholic university, and he's like, I just want to tell you guys that when it comes down to the brain and the spinal cord and things, we don't really know everything. And I was like, the what? Right. And basically, they had just started coming out with PET scans and functional MRI and that, at that time. And so we didn't have all the answers because you couldn't really cut somebody's brain open and study it while they were alive. Right. And so even coming back to the sleep science stuff that we were talking about, sleep apnea changed a lot about what we understand about human function in general. And they hadn't been studying that because they couldn't before. So these last 20 or 30 years have really been a revolution in all things human, right? Even coming back to AI and these things that we're now integrating with. So it's really changing how we live and perform, really.
Alex, you're up, buddy.
BJ, could you?
I know you're really excited to talk.
BJ, could you speak a little closer to the mic?
I can't, Alex.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Sorry, BJ never speaks into the mic. Every time we record, BJ is facing away from the microphone, turning away from it.
It's my incredible.
Funny.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I can't just go. Yeah.
Let's get started with everybody's favorite segment: tap in, tap out.
Tap in now, tap out. Tap in now, tap out. Yeah!
If you don't know the rules of this game, they are as follows. BJ and I are each going to present our guest with a statement. If you agree with the statement, you'll say tap in. If you disagree with the statement, you'll say tap out. And regardless of your answer, you will provide an explanation. So,
Sounds good. So after I give the answer and then I explain?
Yeah, you'll say tap in or tap out and then get into your explanation.
And depending on your
Say
answer,
why.
will determine how much trash we talk.
Okay.
Now, I did
Cool.
stalk your social media, and I saw that you were a Steelers fan. So your statement is...
Tap in. Tap in.
The
is
Steelers
tap in.
signing Aaron Rodgers was a good move.
Tap in.
Okay.
The reason is I just don't think there was a lot of options that were much better at the time, technically. And, I think we needed some leadership and some seniority, to come, especially after kind of Kenny Pickett coming through. I think the NFL is almost like such a social hierarchy, like a military structure, that the younger guys follow the older guys better in those ways. And I think it's really important to have a strong leader like that. And also hope somebody like him has the ability to win a Super Bowl. It gives everybody more hope. And again, I don't know if there were better options. I know there were some arguments for trying to, bring up some young talent and try to, get them the experience. But I think for, what's been going on the last few years, it was probably a good decision. Now, how did that work out and how it's going to work out here moving forward are probably, it could be two different things.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Ketchum?
I have a hard time separating the person from the player. I have a hard time inviting anyone into my network that is just kind of like comes off as a crappy person. And that,
yeah, I get that.
And that's kind of a crappy thing for me to say. But I think when I look at like building a team and building culture, I want someone who's like going to amplify and raise the level of the culture in a positive way. I don't want to bring people in who I know could not do that. Right. So that, to me, that's always like the most important thing. You don't have to be even like this great person. Like there's plenty of people who are not good people that don't destroy the fabric or the culture of a team. And I'm not saying that he did that. I just think there's like he wasn't. There was a lot of people who didn't like him, and I think that there's always the potential for that. And I would rather lean into bringing in someone who's going to raise the level. That's why, like, the Knicks won last night. I mean, they brought in people with like high character that were team players. And to me, if you're trying to win, like that's what I want to build my culture.
Yeah, and I agree to a certain degree. And I'll come back to, Tomlin leaving and some of the stuff that I know from working with some of the Steeler guys over my career. I think some of the things that have developed over the years, and really probably the reason he left, didn't provide, because the real leader is the coach and the management and of the organization, right? And so they have the ability to, direct a player like Rogers or anybody at the highest levels and keep them somewhat in line in that way. And I think again the professionalism that usually comes with that. I always say the thing that I learned about working with pro athletes is that they're professionals, right? And they learn how to professionally handle things. But at the same time, if they come into a culture that it's hard to be a good leader under people that aren't great leaders, type of
Right.
scenario. And so, and I'm not saying that Tomlin wasn't a great leader. I think the things that happened to the Steelers culture in the last half of his era started hurting the culture. And it started, I think, with Polamalu and those guys that were, as they were on their way out, a lot of those guys are making a ton of money and basically they get special treatment, we'll say, right? And I think that that starts to create problems in the culture that permeates. Then you get another diva or whatever you want to say in there, like Rogers. And if the culture's not, set the way that it needs to be for those guys, and you see that in other organizations, they do a better job, right?
Yeah.
Scenario. So I can see what you're saying there.
I think it's hard too, like, because basketball, you can definitely operate. There's fewer people, right? There's 12 people they carry actively. You got 5 starters. There's a limited number of people. So, like, if you have like a Dennis Rodman, for example, um, he can disrupt the other team completely. He can disrupt his own team also by like his antics off the court. But like he always showed up to play, and he knew his very specific role that he had on that team, and he was okay with that. So with the chaos that he created, everybody was okay with it. It was only 4 other people who were impacted versus, the other 11 or the other 10, like on the field. So I think it's like that human connection. There's less opportunity for disruption with that team.
Yeah, I agree. In a group of 5 people that you need to perform, we could get into group dynamics.
Yeah.
But with basketball, it's so much more important that you're cohesive, right?
Yeah.
It's such all 5 of those people need to be clicking, probably even more than it needs to be in football. So I think those selfish personality type of things, ego issues, disappear in the game a little bit better. And I think in basketball. So
Yeah, sure. All right. So mine's gonna be a little controversial.
the Steelers, by the way, let's go, man. That's a great first question.
So this is not Steelers, but Hoist Gracie, overrated. Is Hoist
Tap out.
Gracie overrated as an MMA fighter?
Tap out, no way. So, to be the first, I actually write about this in my book about, I don't want to say like I'm an expert on UFC history, but I've studied it a lot. And there has not been anything that we can look at, and especially in recent times, that has developed and evolved like the UFC has. Look, they're going to be at the White House tonight, right? It used to be illegal in the United States like 20 years ago, right? 30 years ago, now going on 35, right? I guess is it. So, 1992, I think is what Hoist Gracie steps in. And basically, back then, the whole idea of fighting was, you're a jujitsu guy, I'm a wrestler, we get a boxer in there and a sumo guy, if you remember those old UFCs, right? And then some dude that was just a bar fighter or whatever, and let's see who's got it, right? And one of the main reasons is, since you're a little bit older than me, you'll remember this better. It was hard to get film right? It was hard to get film on anything and be able to say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to watch this guy do this, and we're going to learn from this." Kind of even coming back to blood sport in these events, they were created, to also evolve the sport, right? So
Right.
how are we going to know what really works if we don't compete? Right. And
Right.
so I think you really got to look back and think also, now you guys like jujitsu and do jujitsu. Basically, people were like, "This guy's in his pajamas. Like, he can't fight. Like, what? This isn't going to work." Nobody knew what jujitsu was. Right now, 30 years later, you can't fight without knowing jujitsu. So for them to bring it to the United States, and even going back to the history of how it got there with their gym fights, or what, I forget what they called the gym challenges or whatever
Gracie.
it was, the Gracie challenge, the things that they were doing to just be pure promoters of the sport before everything turned in kind of into the McDojo situation with what a lot of is going on now. They were just the pioneers that without them, and particularly Hoist stepping up, in those early days, it probably wouldn't be what it is today.
Yeah. What do you, Alex? You had a pretty quick reaction to that. What are your thoughts?
I don't. I've thought about Hoyce's spot in the sport, and it's it's hard for me. I mean, I understand, like, the my understanding is they chose Hoyce for the UFC specifically because he was like the smallest of the brothers or whatever, so they could show how effective jujitsu is, right? And so, like, I wonder, even within his own family, was he the best at jujitsu, or was it just like he would be the best poster boy for it? And also, especially with like UFC one, you said you were in the UFC history. I went back and watched a lot of the early UFC histories in order. And like UFC one, the competition for the most part, I mean, a lot of those guys had absolutely no idea what to do with someone doing jujitsu. So it's always been hard for me to kind of like understand actually how good he was in in jujitsu specifically, because there's not a lot of footage of him outside of the UFC
How
events.
old are you?
How old am I? 35.
Yeah. Yeah, that might be why, right? Because by the time you started getting into it, it was already well-rounded
Mm-hmm.
fighters fighting, right? And so back then, we just didn't have any concept of that, of what you're talking about today to compare it to. So when you try to compare it to today, it's just not, it's like trying to compare 1940s football to now, right? It's
Right.
just not, right? And the truth is, if you give probably those guys that were elite back then the same situation now, they would be just as elite. They would get better training, they would have better understanding of the tactics and strategies, and they would probably be in the best. There's some even things with like looking at track and field athletes running on cinder tracks versus now, like Ben Johnson was, and those guys were probably just as fast as Usain Bolt, PEDs, blah blah blah, but whatever, the range of, there's a book that's called The Range of Human Capacities. And so the people that have been at the top range of human capacity have probably always have been, but again, it's the same thing as like using a musket in war versus nuclear bombs, right? Type of scenario. You're only as good as the technology and things that you have. So I'm going to argue back with that, Alex. Just and I'm also the guy that's going to be like, yeah, Barry Sanders was the best football player ever. Michael
He was.
Jordan was the best basketball player ever, right? These guys from that era before everything got all tainted.
Well, but
Yeah.
even in UFC one, the just the rule sets of it favored him over others, right? Because you had a sumo wrestler in that tournament, you had the karate guy, you had the dude with the one glove on, right? Like I mean, it's awesome that it was truly like mixed martial arts in there, but you also need to, I think it's important to acknowledge that that rule set was favoring jujitsu, and a lot of the people competing in that had no idea how to handle someone like that.
Well, let's be honest though, compared to what it is today, that was a real fight,
Mm-hmm.
right? The rules were way different than today, right? In the beginning. And so there were very little rules. And so, coming back to him being a real fighter, you have to maybe argue that actually that was what we were seeing. We're the better fighters now. Now we're seeing a sport that's much more judged, right? Than it actually has to do with whether you destroy somebody or not type of scenario. People are point fighting and we're going, oh, they're so great, but they've had 17 decisions in a row, right? Where back then you didn't see that, right? It was kind of do or die,
But
like, literally like a blood sport, right? Type of scenario. So, but I get where you're coming from.
But I
I
also
think
want to acknowledge he did beat people who did know what they're doing. The Ken Shamrock rivalry, obviously, that was very important in the early days, and he won that. And he's got victories over Dan Severn, and so I don't. I'm not saying he's not a good fighter or anything. I don't want that to be the impression. I just don't
No,
know.
it's good. So I'm going to come back to this. So I lived through this a little bit. So I'll give you a little bit of my history again. So I leave Guyana and I coached in grad school for 3 years as an assistant wrestling coach and our strength and conditioning coach. And I started my residency in sports physical therapy at the University of Cincinnati and with the Cincinnati Bengals. And so my first year there, I was working like 80 hours a week, literally. Like it was just 7 days a week, go, go, go. Coming back to my morning tiredness, I would go into the cold plunge. We had their brand new, like big cold plunges there that you could fit like 15 people in at once. And I would take my shirt off and dunk my head in the water and basically hold myself in there for like 30 seconds and come out and be like, oh, all right, I'm ready to work. Right. Because every day was just a grind. But that was when I started doing some MMA stuff. I had done jujitsu in California with a guy named Junior Ghazi, who was I believe, a world champion a little bit when I was on my internship out there. So I had been comfortable with it. I ended up meeting Josh Rafferty, who was on the UFC season 1 Ultimate Fighter. And he's a big connection to Dave Bautista and a lot of those WWE guys. He was training them on how to do striking and whatnot. But basically, when I went to train with him in the group that they were working with, it was Rich Franklin's group. They were one of the first groups that was doing MMA, where they actually trained all the disciplines in one place. So even like talking to Rhonda and some of these other people that I worked with back then, you used to have to go to your striking coach over here. Then you went to jujitsu over here. Then you went and maybe did wrestling, which most of them did not do, right? If they didn't have that background, right? And there wasn't this concept in boxing, right? Somewhere, they were mixing that in. There wasn't this concept of training all the disciplines at once. Number one. Number two, they also weren't thinking of this as like, we are athletes. They were thinking we're fighters type of scenario. Then the next thing evolves, and now we're the whole way to the UFCPI, right? Where these people can go, these athletes can go and live there and train and have the best, possible things, that you can get access to. And so that's also part of this evolution, which really changes the game. And so now, like I talked about this in another podcast I did recently. What do you have when you have two people that are in the strong angle and now they're coming together? That's what we want to see, right? And we see that a lot in wrestling because the sport is already kind of, vetted out of whatever you want to say. It's been the same for 1,000 years, basically. But we want to see those two people that have that will to win, and they have the skill and the conditioning and the coaching and everything behind them, and they're at an equal level. And both guys walk out there thinking, "I'm going to break this dude." And it's like, what? Right? Like delusional optimism at its highest, right? You're getting ready to go compete against the baddest dude around, and you're still thinking, yeah, I'm going to break this guy. And he's thinking the exact same thing, right? And so, we've gotten to see, if you really pay attention again to the history of it, from it go to this like basic thing that was, people fighting it. Even Forrest Griffin, I believe, and Stephen Bonner and those guys, they were taking, $100 fights in back of bars and things like that back then. Oh yeah, I'll jump in this cage and fight somebody, tough man competitions, to where it's evolved. And really it's jumped into the sports entertainment category, right? So we're seeing things you really start to skew in that direction. Anyway, sorry for the rant. These are great because these are
no,
I think a little bit more emotional questions than looking at irradiation and rate coding and the Hebbian principle and things like that. So
no, for sure. I think like what I kind of connected there with too is like about like the mindset that you take, right? Like that one takes. So you have like the one school of thought where it's flow, like feel it, like you need to be in it, and then you have and then you have people who are like, I'm coming in, I'm doing this task, and this is the way it's going to go. And then you have people who blend those two kind of philosophies, right? And then you have people who are like Kobe, who are indifferent. Like, this is the thing. I'm going to win or I'm going to lose, but I'm staying focused in this. Like Brunson exemplified that. The Knicks did this last run where it was every game was 0-0. Every possession was a new possession, right? So like you have all these like different approaches towards it. Um, I think like my one guy yesterday, we had a tournament, grappling industries tournament, and one of my kids, he's 17, he fought in the white belt division, first time he's ever fought, but he fought in the adult division. So he's fighting grown men who some have wrestling backgrounds. He has no wrestling background, and he's going to be good. Like he is going to be a solid grappler. And he's like, I just thought I was going to come in today, and I manifested it all day yesterday. I'm going to do great. I'm going to do great. And he did do great, but he didn't win, right? But he did awesome. Like he was resilient. He did all the things you need to do, right? Be resilient, defend, not give up, be persistent, like all of those things. He didn't accept like positions.
This is something I'm super into, but go ahead if you have
No,
anything else. Sorry.
No, and that's what I kind of like. You have there's these varying schools of thought, right? And I'm curious, like what's been your approach? Because when I think of like our upbringing, this is what I was kind of alluding to, like when we were talking earlier, is like we were always, like I said to somebody, someone's like, "Yo, you're like," they called me tough, and I'm like, look, in my neighborhood, I was not tough. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't, right? Like no one would be like, oh yeah, Ketchum was like the toughest kid in the neighborhood. No, I was like, out of 10 people, I was like 11th on the depth chart. But and that's what we remember, right? Like
Yeah.
just being the small, being weak, like the older guys like handling you. And even as one gets older, I always carry that on my shoulder, like I'm still not enough. Right? And that's an issue unto itself.
Yeah, we've talked about that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, what's your philosophy, one personally, but then also what do you try to develop and build in your athletes and with your clients? Like, what's your approach?
Yeah, so I think I'll go back to, and again, this will actually go back to what we were talking about the UFC. So, and one of the reasons why wrestling, I think that maybe that people miss is such a great base sport, right? For combat sports, is because we compete a ton. And so with competition though comes preparedness for competition. And so comes with, do you do those mantras and affirmations and all of those things the day before and talk the talk, but now you got to walk the walk tomorrow type of situation, right? And how do you even transition in that 24-hour period where you go from being, this student, that's this nice guy that has to be this upstanding kid in a community, and now tomorrow I got to go fight somebody, right? Type of thing. And wrestling's obviously a controlled fight. And so I'm really into the preparation and mindset for that. And one of the main things is that the reason why we compete is to, self-actualize. That's why you're there. Right. And early on with us, I'll come back to the neighborhood. It was competitive, right? I always joke that it was like the Lord of the Flies. And there was a huge social hierarchy in our neighborhood, right? And so you fought to maintain your status in that social hierarchy because Jeremy Hepler or one of these guys that were 100 pounds were still going to try to take your lunch if they could, right?
100%.
Type of scenario, right? And one of the things I talk about, and I've worked with Rhonda and Helen Marolis and all of this type of stuff. There wasn't a boy in our neighborhood that would lose a fight to a girl, right?
Right.
And it was just like the boys were raw, right? We didn't have weak boys in our neighborhood, right? If you
Right.
went outside in our neighborhood, you had to be prepared to compete. It might not have had to be in a fight, right? But
Right.
we were always competing. It's funny because I work with Mark Valella now, right, at this Universal Wellness Concepts down here, and we'll talk every once in a while. BJ was a couple years older than us, but he was actually kind of smaller relative to the some of the, you're not the most gigantic guy, right?
I
Type of
definitely.
scenario, right? Yeah. And so, we would end up mixing up with him on the playground a lot. And he would do this thing when he would tackle us at football and hit us with his forearm in the back. And he
DJ.
would say, the hammer is coming, boom, right? And so actually, and it's funny because
And
I think back to my agility. Like for a big guy, I'm really agile, right? And I actually think back to that a lot in my neighborhood of needing to be right because BJ's coming at me with the hammer. And so, I'm not even joking. Like that was where it started. But I could have stayed at home on my porch, or I could have walked across the street and went into that playground, that we played in our, as we were growing up, and decided where I wanted to be in the pecking order. So in my personal philosophy, I knew you were going to get into stuff like this. I'm not going to cry. And
I'm trying
so
right now to bring it back
yeah,
to
right.
him.
Well, and again, Mark and I talk about just like or Butler in general in our neighborhood are probably these rarity out places.
Mhm.
But coming back to that, I kept figuring out that getting better at getting better was the trick,
Mm.
right? And so as much as I attached myself to the outcome, that's where I dealt with my own psychological demons. I was still somebody that was super into the process of getting better. And so also the science of getting better. And as I got more into realizing there was a science behind it, I got more into that. Like, oh, this is something that's systematic, right? These are things that you can replicate, what works, what doesn't, what's the strong angle versus the weak angle, not to, jump into that. And that was kind of my philosophy from the beginning. And I think there's some pretty interesting data on this too. Like the more that you get those experiences from stepping out there and walking the walk, the more likely you are to step back out there, right? Because your
Right.
true self-efficacy improves. And so I think we had a great, forging ground for that, in that neighborhood and in Butler and even in just Western Pennsylvania in general. I've lived, all around like you have too as well. You got out of Western PA and, I don't know if I've ever been anywhere where people prioritize sports in competition like in that area. And even coming back to wrestling, Butler didn't have a wrestling program until I was in seventh grade. So you were probably like already in college or graduated from college at that time. Yeah, I'm just joking. Uh,
They already had a
and
pension
so,
going, I think.
um,
The hammer's
and
coming.
so, yeah, I'm gonna work on my head movement. Um, so I think that the wrestling world was so thick there as well. I don't think it was directly influencing Butler necessarily at the time, but that whole region and just Ohio and Pennsylvania, and and that's another funny part of the story, right? 1992, we get wrestling at our school. Stoner becomes the coach in 1993. I go out for the wrestling team in 1994. And so, I talked to, my friends years later. I'm like, you realize Butler didn't even have a wrestling program. What? That was the biggest school in the Whitfield. You guys didn't have wrestling? Like how I still actually, I've always wanted to like dig into that. I don't know how that actually happened. Especially we were
Probably
advanced.
had
You
to
had
do with
Paul
the football.
Urim and these guys that were sorry, say that.
It probably had to do with the football mafia.
Yeah, some political crap, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But even with that, like Paul Urim was this advanced PE
Right?
teacher. We had all this, and I come back to that even like we were actually lucky in a lot of ways to grow up where we did because things were more advanced. But then in other ways, like for example, I got no exposure to colleges and things like that. And so, people didn't really expect you to do anything if you grew up in Butler. You were already kind of like, oh yeah, you're gonna go work in the steel mill type of scenario, right? You get done with high school, you stay there, you get a labor job, and you do the damn thing, right? And if you were gonna leave there, that was a rarity, in a
Yeah.
lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, and Alex, I'll kick it over to you. Like one of the things uh, when you mentioned like Paul Urim, and the audience won't know who any of these people are, but it just kind of exemplifies what you're saying is like we had a strength and conditioning coach, like Coach Savannah. You
Yeah,
know, high schools did not have that in the 90s. We had that in the 80s, you know, and that goes back to like a guy named Paul Urim, who was the strength coach for the Steelers during their dynasty, who was a PE teacher in our school district. So like it was always something. Well, the one picture is like right above me is like Marty Cypher, who was the 84 Olympic coach. He ran the team at the Y. Like it was always something in our community. I think that really shows that like there was that commitment to discipline, right? In
And,
the
and
in
even
training,
there, you had Clark's House of Fitness, right? You
right?
had, this big bodybuilding gym that was right in our neighborhood, and there was a powerlifting gym behind Miller's Meats. Like I never
Yep.
even knew that. Actually, Billy Jackson told me about that
Yeah.
like 10 years ago. I was like, what? Right? Even the
Great point.
YMCA. It was just a place where people, the physical culture in our hometown was awesome. Right. Another thing that I bring up all the time is that we had a VA hospital there, which you look at it and you step back and go, isn't that kind of strange? In our town, we had a VA hospital, right? I mean, a VA hospital is a big deal, right? You usually only see them more in like real major metropolitan areas. And again, people will ask me about my background like that. I always think about how many military people. I actually read this book, and I can't ever remember the name of it. Years back, somebody gave it to me, and it was about the GI Bill. And at one point in the United States, over 50% of the professionals, teachers, doctors, lawyers, had some type of military background from the GI Bill. Yeah. And so I think in our hometown, it was heavily concentrated that way. And you didn't realize that you were dealing with all of these military type of people that had this, and in the United States, we had that culture already. But then here we are in this kind of like hotbed, I think that was going on. And have you ever read The Talent Code?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's just funny. I got to meet Daniel
Yeah.
Coyle, I think
Oh,
his name was, a couple years ago. But yeah, that book talks about all these talent hotbeds, and I think
mhm.
sometimes when you look at Butler, there might have been some of those things actually going on there.
Yeah, that's I never even thought of that. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
On the other side, I'll come back to that. I always go to what you just said. You were somebody, I think, that accessed those things in Butler. It was a little bit weird even for you out of our neighborhood doing that thing.
Mhm.
Our neighborhood was even a little bit more of the counterculture, a little bit more of the ghetto neighborhood type of scenario, right? Where it was a little bit more gang oriented mentally. And also the rest of the community. If you were from our neighborhood, it was called the island, right? You didn't get accepted. And even as much as that's probably actually not true, that's how we thought.
Yeah,
Right. So we thought, oh, if we, go to try to do these things, we're not going to be accepted. Like even John Kamer, right? He was one of the best basketball players that I've ever seen. He could shoot from half court and make 10 out of
yeah.
10 shots,
Oh,
right? And he barely played for Butler, right?
yeah.
Type of
Real good.
situation.
He was as good as like
So good.
so good.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. Right, but I think a lot of people from our neighborhood were raised with bad attitudes towards organized
the
anything type
establishment.
of thing. It was like
Yeah,
anti-establishment type of stuff, right? And I had that problem. I probably still have that problem a bit. It could probably help me in wrestling a little bit, help me to, be an entrepreneur and own my own business. But you ran into that kind of like you were talking about. There was a bit of a good old boys club, and there were some real things like, my senior year of football, the ex head coach, Mr. Nunes, his son was our quarterback. Mr. Milanovic, who is the athletic director, his son was, on the team, and the head coach at the time, Mr. Fairby's son, was on the team,
yeah.
right? And so that created some tough dynamics culturally for us. So, anyways, we could go down the Butler rabbit hole. This isn't the Butler podcast. We should start one.
Oh, that'd be great. We should start a
Yeah,
Butler physical culture episode.
yeah. There we go. Actually, it'd be really good. Yeah.
you've mentioned this concept of the strong angle a few times already. Why don't you explain to us what that is?
Yeah, so it's basically leverage, right? And so when you look at any scenario, you can either be in a position of advantage or disadvantage, a position of leverage or a position lacking leverage. And you realize that in grappling really, really quickly. I think intuitively, I had this understanding. I trained this way very much, especially because I was a lighter heavyweight. And so as I got more into heavyweight competition, my concept of leverage got very, very tightened, where it was within a millimeter, type of scenario, or I couldn't get the torques and pressures that I needed to do to manipulate some of those bigger guys. And then throughout my career, especially as a physical therapist, we use a lot of what's called accommodating resistance. Alex, are you familiar with what accommodating resistance is? I know BJ knows.
Probably not.
Yeah, so it's like using bands and chains and isokinetic machines. Yeah, I kind of had an inkling there.
Oh,
I know
I look
BJ's got
stupid,
a
is what
huge
you're saying.
background in
This
the
guy
industry.
doesn't know what I'm talking about.
No, it's just the average person. This is actually what I was getting ready to say. I was working on this, and the system that I use, and what's traditionally called the sports lab or Marinovich training, heavily uses accommodating resistance. And I was stewing on the fact that every time somebody would come to see me, these high level athletes, even the high school kids, a lot of times, well, why doesn't anybody know about this stuff? Why can't we find the machines? Where did this come from? Blah, blah, blah. And I would have to tell them this story about how, there were all these problems, that stopped the system from getting out into the mainstream. And so I've been working on, this for a long time. And I was sitting there going, yeah, people need to understand accommodating resistance. And I was like, kept saying it to myself. And then I was like, you know, if I go to somebody and I'm like, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do accommodating resistance, right? Especially somebody from like real physical culture, strength culture. Wait, you going to accommodate me? Like, it's just a weak word, right? Type of scenario. And so basically I was looking for the real concept behind it. And what it is that accommodating resistance basically unloads the weakest angle in the range of motion and puts more stress on the strongest angle in the range of motion. But the strong angle is not just a range of motion. It's actually a code of alignment, connection, and coordination that you can take into execution. Basically, all your human biological functions are the best when they're in the strongest angles, and they're inefficient at best in the weakest angles, just like in jujitsu, just in like wrestling, right? There's these positions where you have leverage where everything seems to flow, like BJ was just kind of talking about that. It's the same thing psychologically, emotionally, relationally. It's a similar principle that's a universal one that I didn't realize that I was going to figure out. And as I kept figuring it out, I kept comparing it to, what I had known in the past and what I had been seeing conversations. I was like, oh, there it is, there it is, there it is. Oh yeah, this is holding up underneath of all of these different conditions. Hopefully that explains it. Okay.
Yeah, I think I got it. BJ, do you
So
understand?
what I usually tell people, it's the balancing point between the perfect harmony of tension and relaxation, which is the trick. So it's not yin or yang, it's yin and yang. And most of the time that's our biggest problem, is that we decide to pick a side dominance, right? Whether it's your right hand and you don't want to train your left side, which ends up being a big weeder outer in most sports, or you want to be right brained and not left brained, whatever it is. But on the pursuit of wellness and performance, it always leads to mastery and leadership. And so the problem is, when we start our pursuits of wellness and performance, we don't start with the end in mind, because we can't clearly define mastery and leadership. Number one. Number two, we don't even realize that's actually where we're going. So when you come back to the present moment and you're trying to invest it, you don't realize that you need to be investing it in the principles of mastery and leadership. So it becomes a torturous path of inefficiency along the way, where you end up grinding harder than you need to, because you don't realize what the end that the end is not clearly defined. So if you don't have the end clearly defined, how can you be well aligned in the present moment? Well, exactly. That puts you in the weak angle, if that makes sense, right? Because now there's no way for you to have that balance of tension and relaxation. You're going to be imbalanced because you don't have the way to create a path that's going to get you there directly and efficiently. And then we look at transfer in anything that we're doing. We want to have the most direct transfer in the investment in the present moment of anything that we're doing. And most of the times it's just not happening, right? We're just not prioritizing that investment of the present moment. We show up again, coming back to, what we're doing before competitions and practice and all of these things. We just have a very inefficient process because of what I just said. And more than anything, it's just not recognizing that there is a strong angle and a weak angle in any moment. And if you start asking that question, that's the game changer. It's the evaluator of the evaluation. So what I'm a specialist in is evaluation, right? So if you have your doctorate, that's really what you are. You're a master, doctorate level evaluator, right? And so when we start to go into evaluation, there's a lot of silos that you can go into in different directions, and there's not one central concept that allows you to look at any type of evaluation and quickly, if I walk into a jiu-jitsu dojo, or your strength and conditioning area, or a Pilates studio, or some type of sports psychology situation, whatever, you can have this central concept to compare it to and go, is this a strong angle, or is this the weak angle?
But I think too, like it's connecting to like I call it like the dead time. Like, so it's like in between the concentric and the eccentric, right? The amortization
Okay.
phase. And
Right. I call it the switch.
the switch, yeah. It's that space of like, if it's too long, you're not going to be able to produce force, right? Like you're just because it flattens out. Like all the force, everything that's going into, if we think of jumping, everything that's coming down. And if you're stagnant and you're flat, you're not going to be able to come out of the hole quicker, right?
Right.
So it's the ability to react, right? And I think that connects like right back to jujitsu. What makes the really good jujitsu players, and what I think we all experience too, like when you're like in that white belt phase, you're just trying to survive, right? And then as you start to advance, you know where you need to go, but that dead space is so long, you're still flat on your back. Like someone's, we'll say, passing your guard, and they flatten you out, and you're there too long, right? It's that recognition in the game of jujitsu, seeing, all right, this person, because you know you're going to lose before the other person knows they're going to win, and they're passing, don't settle. You always hear coaches say that, like, don't settle, but we don't get into seeing that person coming. You know you're going to lose this position because they don't know you're going to lose it yet. So what can you do to be proactive in not accepting the next position? And I think of that as the same thing with lifting weights, right? Like I want to be able to turn the switch, as you said, as quickly as possible. But the only way I can do that is to actually be strong enough to overcome the forces, right? To then put the effort out. But you have to train that. Like it's in and you need to be okay with that too. I think in the world of lifting now too, everybody, because you hear like fascia training is nervous system training, and then you have people who are like barbell movements. We're making this too complicated. Well, it's complicated because I think what happens is that people get so rigid in their thinking, they don't want to see all these
Right.
other systems and how they can actually support each other, right? So, like, if you were to
Well,
take, no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, this is why the strong angle is so important, because it's a central concept instead of talking about all these siloed concepts, right? The strong angle is in everything. And so whenever you can relate to it, then you start seeing it. And that's what, that I was telling you guys before we hopped on. I got this new ebook that I'm getting ready to put out about the strong angle lens, because now you start seeing all of this stuff more clearly. You see these blind spots, right? And ultimately, like you said, you're not prepared for that switch. And the one of the other parts to Alex's answer, the strong angle is where you can 1 inch punch. So I think that you should always be ready to 1 inch punch. You should always be comparing yourself relative to that ability to 1 inch punch. And like you were asking earlier about Chad Johnson, and I talk about that in the first book, in the Strong Angle Way. Chad Johnson was the first person that showed me what the strong angle actually was. And so it was the same thing that I helped teach Antonio Brown when I started working with him. And it was this ability to 1 inch punch while you're moving at full speed and change directions. right? And I'd already been kind of obsessed with Bruce Lee's 1 inch punch because there is no dead space. The dead space, you go from static to dynamic, right? And they talk about that. There's static to dynamic training, right? Super training, and Verkhoshansky and Sif talk about that. And basically it is the 1 inch punch. So if you're in control, and we forget about what the most important things are. So number one is basically motor control. Do you have control over the ranges of motions that you can put your body through, which again is neurological? So that basically means that everything that we do in physical function is neurological. It is nervous system training, but it doesn't mean that nervous system training is its own fascial,
Right.
scenario. And I've been talking to Quentin about that a lot. It's just that, again, if you prioritize the strong angle and understand it, it makes you prioritize the nervous system. And the nervous system is in charge of all the physiological functions of the body, even down to the cellular level. They're in this beautiful, harmony. Again, the body has this kind of strong angle state that it wants to be in. But then the next part is movement economy. So movement economy, when we even learn in basic like movement science, we always, well, movement economy is the most important thing. Well, it's like, well, are you prioritizing that?
Right.
Right. Most of the time, the things that we say are the most important are the first things that get deprioritized.
Right.
Right. So now I come back with weightlifting. If you're trying to be more athletic, if you're trying to be better at switching directions, just like you just said, that you have to overcome the weight in and of itself, but you also have to overcome the acceleration and the inertia of that weight wanting to come to the ground. So it weights are always overloading the weakest angle in the joint range of motion. So if you go over more than about 1/3 to 40% of your maximum, automatically you can't switch directions as efficiently. So that's a lot of the reason why, again, in PT in this Marinovich system, we don't do the traditional stuff because we so are heavily focused on that stretch shortening cycle, amortization, coupling, whatever the word is that you want to use. That's another part of the problem with the whole thing. That's why I
Right.
just started calling it the switch, because there's so many, different, scientific terms on it. But it's the reason why you throw a shot put like this and a baseball like this, right? Because a baseball weighs a few ounces, and when I bring it away from my body, I can use my body to twist and explode. But when I throw a shot put, it has to be close to my center. So, and again, most of your strong angle concepts in weightlifting are that we're going to centralize the load, right? Even a safety squat bar, or, like an X bar deadlift, or even doing step ups and certain things. If we want to get better integration, and this is another thing that I'm working on, is basically we need to redefine fitness. And so my new definition is integrity under demand, particularly the demands of speed and load and fatigue. And so,
Right.
can we maintain integrity? Well, fitness is not just about working out. It's survival of the fittest, right? I could go into that. That's where the original term fitness comes from. Human life and biology is about fitness, and it's about our kinetic chain in our system staying, integrated when we encounter demands. How well can you do that as the demand builds? That's what real fitness is. It's not all about some capacity test type of scenario. There's more to it, because it's integrating psychology, emotional, your neurometabolic state, what you're bringing. Did you get into a fight with your wife or your kids the day before, and now you got to bring that into the equation. So there's a lot that goes into it. Sorry, I know I keep getting on these rants. I apologize.
No, it's great. I think too, like people don't understand either that the work, like, because people who are so married to the barbell, and I love the barbell. Like the barbell absolutely has its place, like for
Yeah,
sure. I
it
believe in
hurts my heart sometimes how married
yeah,
you are. No, I'm just kidding. I
yeah,
like the barbell too. Yeah, so
yeah. I mean,
I'm not against it 100%.
yeah, and all of it kind of comes back to it really stems out of like the popularization of accommodating resistance, right? Like in the barbell, that really comes from Louis Simmons, right? Like in how he
Sure.
made it popular in the powerlifting circles. But the sports performance is what the modalities you choose and how you choose to use those modalities are dependent on the sport, right? Like it makes sense to do it a certain way for powerlifting, like accommodating resistance, but it needs to look different in for its transfer to other sports.
Right.
but I think at the same time, you need to use all those things, right? Like it's a conjugate system. It's a complex system. Like you need to be able to, you have access to all these tools. What's the best tool at the right time and for the person, right? And I think people too get so caught up in they're not understanding of how the body works. And you don't even necessarily need to be like, I don't have a degree in this, but I study it. And I also think we overcomplicate it. Like people hear like fascia training or nervous system training and they start like talking woo woo, like that's, it's
And
not,
it's not what
it's not
right,
woo woo.
right.
But they said the same thing. The same people who are all about like it's stupid or the barbell's the most important thing. They're they don't understand that like when Louis and having had learned from Louis myself, I went out there and trained with him for the greatest week of my life and spent so much time learning with him in an unfiltered way for a week. People thought he was woo woo. They
Sure,
thought he was they
sure.
thought he was crazy. And that man had no high school degree at all. And so, but
Right. Are you
I remember,
familiar with Boyd Epley, and I think
yeah,
his name was Rob Roy, possibly, because that was another one. I just want to throw that out there if anybody's watching, because there was just an evolution with the National Strength and Conditioning Association and powerlifting. And what we got to remember, and this is a big truth behind this, and I don't know the details, but there was some marrying up on the political side of that with the National Strength and Conditioning Association and the barbell powerlifting, I believe, community, where they were intertangled or intertwined in one another financially and politically, and that was part of why they kept promoting each other type of scenario. So it didn't necessarily have to do with we had locked in on the best ways of training athletes. And so Nebraska comes out with bigger, faster, stronger, and they have this kind of really good history. And then all of a sudden, everybody else starts weightlifting, and their competitive advantage starts going away. And it's
right.
also, I think, one of the reasons why we're seeing this rebirth of this nervous system idea, right? Where everybody's promoting the Russian sports science stuff, right? And you're seeing more and more about that. But the funny part is that that was adopted into American training, especially actually your background's track and field. And I
Yeah,
just think about this, like, why don't we look more into two things, track and field and wrestling? Right.
right.
And so, like, how are we training wrestlers and how do we train track and field athletes? You have this meter seconds grams, hard qualities, right? And then we have to take wrestling, which is a sport that requires your physical faculties to be at the highest level in every scenario, grip strength and balance and
And
reactive strength
and
and right relative strength, everything. Sorry, go ahead.
it's unpredictable. Like
Right.
you're
Yeah,
doing something
exactly. Right.
very
And that's why,
controlled.
yeah,
Yeah.
track is so controlled. Right. Yeah, exactly. And
Mhm.
so I don't know if you're familiar with this. There's some papers that have come out in like the last 10 years on what they call the control chaos continuum. And it's more of a rehab thing where we're bringing people to more supportive kind of nerfing to maximum chaos. And so this is probably actually what we're talking about. The biggest blind spot that we have is just how do you align phase, function, and future? And so most of the time we're able to try to, really go, okay, this is where you're at functionally. I can do some tests, right? I know what your goals are. You want to be a, Naga champion or whatever type of thing. But what phase are we in right now in this continuum of this pursuit of mastery and leadership and again, wellness and performance? And so we struggle with that and we screw up the phases. And that's, even trying to get into periodization, like, depending on which guy and philosophy that you're getting into, there's a lot of mental gymnastics that you have to get through with that. And really, it requires a pretty heavy base of experience, I think, to get that stuff right. So, anyway, sorry again. Go ahead.
No, no, I love it. I think it makes total sense to me. I remember I was probably in high school and I got access. I don't remember exactly how I got access to it, but it was to the Huckler Power program, so Boyd Epton's program that he built. I was definitely in high school. It was somewhere I probably learned it like at some track thing that I did like in ninth grade, some seminar I went to, and that's the most fascinating thing. Like all of these things are really come out of the same research that was developed in Russia in the Eastern Bloc countries because they were government funded. They were laboratory settings. They were, coaches who were actually doing this work. And that's just what I find so interesting. We're all talking about like the same stuff in the strength and conditioning world, like trying to make people better. It all kind of comes back to the same research, but we just, for some reason, people just can't agree on that. And I find it fascinating. Like, I think as a coach, you need to know something really well, like a system really well, whether it's linear periodization or conjugate periodization, like whatever it is. We'll just throw those two out there. But you need to understand something. And then if you need to start to understand the other things, right? And learn how there's these common threads between them. Like, what are we really?
But I think what you just said can be just a mouthful and a huge gap for some people. I think it's sometimes too, having my doctorate and my license in this type of stuff, we have a fiduciary responsibility to do the right thing and recognize our own bias and get our ego out of the way. When you come to see me with your shoulder problem, right? I can't be like, I'm the king, I know everything type of scenario, right? I got to be like, no, hold on a second. This could be cancer. I don't know if this is going to be shoulder arthritis, right? So it's a very humbling scenario, or they scare the heck out of us too. Like maybe you're going to have a stroke in 2 seconds, right? And once you actually start seeing that type of stuff, again, you start developing a better sense of human because you know the full ends of the spectrum of what can happen, and particularly even on this. And I think that this is the one of the biggest challenges that we have. Like you just said, you have to be willing to step back and go, you don't know what you don't know, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect. And sometimes when you're not vetted out that way, you've never been pushed into your discomfort zone to that level to crack your psychology to go, yeah, you know what? I don't know shit. Right. And and I've gotten really into my Christian background after I just swore, but like you look at God's design and you have to, and most of the scientists of history were Christians. And their thing was, I'm studying God's design. Look how fascinating this thing is that we can't fully understand, but we're so egotistical that we think that we can
Yeah.
completely understand it. And then as soon as you get that way, you stop learning, and it starts blocking you from being able to to see your blind spots again. And you can't have integration when you have blind spots. Like it creates fragmentation. So that's why we need to pursue the strong angle. We can call it something different. If people don't like that term, we could call it something different, right? But we need to pursue integration and optimization, right? Even looking at like a kinetic chain, the original idea of a kinetic chain came from uh, engineering and mechanics. Then there was an orthopedic surgeon that brought it into the lexicon. And even with that, we really never thought about, well, what is the entire kinetic chain doing here?
Right.
Right. If the entire kinetic chain, and again, this is the strong angle code, we miss connection. So if everything's not connected, and we have a blind spot somewhere in the
Yep.
system's going to be inefficient at best. Most likely it's going to break down, especially when we add the demands of load, speed, and fatigue to the system. And
Yeah.
so now in a biological system, the neat part is all kinds of crazy stuff happens. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday because we have this idea of evolution, and the truth of it is that biology does whatever it wants to do. It doesn't follow some perfect path, right? And so just because something doesn't make sense doesn't mean that it's not going to happen in biology, right? We always want to make it calculus and mathematical type and just follow the exact design of physics, but biology is not that way. And again, that's coming back to even why I got into this, of what I was saying about my own personal thing. It's that acceptance of that I'm never probably going to reach what I call Ultima Thule, which is this unreachable, reachable place. And basically, I just have to keep enjoying getting better. Right. And if I don't enjoy getting better, right, I should probably find something else to do, if that makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
Getting better, getting better.
transforming transformation. That's the other part, right? We're throwing this word transformation around all the time. Like, like it's just some decision, like, oh yeah, I'm going to transform now, right? Well, you might be right, but what are you going to transform into? And again, these biological principles, you are transforming all the time, whether you like it or not, right? And so how do you get some of the controls on that transformation is the question. How much more efficiency can you have in that transformation?
All right, that is part 1 for this episode. Part 2 will be out next week. We'll catch you then. All right, you guys ready to get started?
Yeah, boy.
Alrighty.
Oh wait, I have one more.
You just
Wrestling,
I
shame.
was peeking to get ready to start this.
No one
and you
cares.
just threw me off, bro.
No one cares, Alex. Sheamus, right? Then you worked with Sheamus, right?
Yeah, I worked with Sheamus.
Oh,
Yep.
big
yeah,
Sheamus.
Samoa Joe. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Batista.
DC's own.
Alex has an erection right now. I'm just like,
That's actually where this came from. I was got to go backstage for the Royal Rumble with Batista.
Oh wow, that's cool. Have you trained with?
Alex
have you done? I know he does jujitsu. Have you like grappled with him?
No,
at all?
I never have actually got to roll with him. No.
I don't think you roll with him. I think he's there. Like you just are amongst his presence, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually pretty much how it is. Yeah, but I think he's still rolling now.
Yeah.
from what I know.
He might be a
Yeah.
brown belt. I think he's a brown belt now.
Last I saw, he was purple.
He's legit. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like takes it. He's a legit serious martial arts type of person.
Yeah.
All right, BJ. Now
He's
Oh,
actually super quiet. Like if he was here right now, he wouldn't even have said a word. He would have just sat here and listened to us talk, and then you would ask him a question. He's like one sentence, and then he's done. Yeah,
That's
he's not
interesting.
like a huge talker. Yeah. And then you see his personality, like he has that alter ego that he switches into. You know.
dude, when he
Like
was
saving it all.
when he was doing his heel run against John Cena, and he was like talking about John Cena kissing fat chicks and hugging babies, and he was in a wheelchair, is some of the funniest shit I've ever seen.
John Cena.
Yeah, he's a really interesting person. But anyways, I think a lot of them are like that's one of the things I know. BJ's got some people that he knows that way too, and especially the WWE people because they're kind of actors in a lot of ways, right? So they have that thespian thing, but then they're also these, dynamic, athletic type of people, and it's just really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. All right, Alex.
All right, now I got to restart the process of getting ready.
Jesus. Such a prima donna. You should try coaching.
What's that?
Nothing.
All right.